this whole topic I'm going to be talking about today is a little bit starting out with talking about Iran and the Iranian Revolution and how that impacted women, and then going on a little bit more about how it affected culture and the arts, and how I kind of collaborated with some composers. And then I might have play a little bit for you too at the end, depending, we'll see. But anyway, so basically for this first, just to briefly kind of overview things in more detail, like I said, we'll be talking about the impact of the Iranian Revolution. And that's not so much just in regards to women, but just a brief overview, because I think a lot of us know that it happened, but we don't understand the full extent of what truly happened. Then we'll go into talking about struggles faced by Persian women post-revolution, the impact on women in music in Iran, Persian women's fighting for their rights in the arts and in music, and then career pursuits for Persian women in music, how they kind of fought to get a career. And then at the very end, I'll talk about a few of our modern Iranian composers, and I'll share a few of their stories. I interviewed a few composers this past summer, and they had some very deep, impactful stories, and I think it's wonderful just to hear verbatim what they said. So the easiest way to start this is pre-revolution. So prior to 1978, you can kind of consider everything happening in Iran to be very westernized and what we would consider, quote, normal kind of here today. So women were not covered, women were treated basically as equals, if you will. So you can see I have my fun little images. So Gugush is a former pop star of Iran. And so prior to the revolution, you can see her on covers of magazines and just, living her best life, looking gorgeous with her awards. But then unfortunately, post-revolution, this kind of publications and freedom of women had been stripped away. And then you'll see in the image here, there's a group of women playing in a Persian orchestra, a Bansaran orchestra, which literally just means a woman's orchestra. So this just gives you a quick little snapshot of what pre-revolution was like. So just something we would typically experience, right? You go on social media and you scroll, and this is kind of the pictures you would see. You would see women playing together, no issues at all. Unfortunately, when the revolution happened in 1978, 1979, all of this completely changed. So during this time period in the 78 and 79, the Iranian Revolution basically essentially boils down to a resurgence of Islamic religion and also a rejection of modernization and westernization in Iranian society. So when I talk about a lot of this, a lot of what I'm talking about today revolves around changes from westernization into the Islamic religion. And this is all from a very subjective standpoint. I'm just kind of telling you what was happening before and what was happening after, no opinions sort of involved. So with that, the two leaders, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, he was the Shah, which is known as the leader of Iran, up until right and before the revolution. And he was a real pioneer, very modernized, more liberated sort of leader. He very much prioritized westernizing Iran and having Iran fit in with all of the world. So his big sort of thing with my talk today is that he was very supportive of women's rights, and he wanted women to be equal and wanted women to be just as important as men were. And then, unfortunately, in 1978 and 79, with the revolution, he was overthrown by the Islamic rule. So Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, he was the person who led the revolution that happened, which then shifted this idea of westernization straight into this Islamic religion, the Shurian approach. So these are the two leaders, and I think the easiest way just to kind of summarize overall the differences between the two. So think about it like this. Literally in 1977, the things I'll talk about with Pahlavi, those were a lot of what we are used to now here in America. Within 1 year, it all switched. So when I talk about these differences, it seems like, oh, okay, yeah, those are very extreme, but we also need to consider that they were really extreme in a very quick amount of time. So one example, which I'll talk about, is women were allowed to show their hair and not be covered. Literally the next day, they were required to be covered and modest. So it wasn't just a gradual, it was just almost like an overnight sort of thing. So the first comparison, if you will, or difference, so under Pahlavi's rule prior to the revolution, it was a very Western-inspired legal system. It was very much influenced by the French legal system, a lot of what we're kind of known for today here, just a very emphasis on individual rights and very secular principles. And then after the revolution under Khomeini's rule, everything shifted to be based under the Sharia law. So that is also the Islamic law. And basically, with this, all of the Sharia law is based under the words of the Quran, their religious text. And basically, what happened was all of this Western-inspired laws were replaced with traditional Islamic laws. So one major thing to think about with this is that, a good example is that when in the Western legal system, Pahlavi had, if someone did something like maybe steal from a convenience store, it would be kind of similar to here, maybe get a fine, maybe overnight, some jail, something, nothing crazy. But under Khomeini's rule and with using the Quran text to determine a lot of punishments, if someone was a thief, even no matter how small, something as extreme as having to cut off their hand, because that is what is said in the Quran to be. So very, very different. The next is a very pro-foreign policy under Pahlavi's theory versus an anti-Western foreign policy. So prior to the revolution, Iran was very much all about building connection with everyone in all countries. They really wanted to become allies and very close with the United States, and just kind of, everyone's all happy, sort of, if you will, easy enough. And then under the revolution, Khomeini believed that the US and Western civilization was a threat to Iran and their culture. So basically, a lot of the sort of relationships that the country had built were basically torn apart under his rule, because he believed that Iran should view the United States and others as a threat and an enemy to them. So we then move on to talking a bit more about the attire for women. So in Pahlavi's reign, as you saw in the pictures of the pre-revolution women can wear whatever we want. We can be like how we are here, covers were not required. In the 1930s, Pahlavi's father, who was the previous Shah, he actually made it where it was a ban, like a law, where you were not required to wear them at all. So it was a law almost stating you can dress as you want, anyway. And then once again, under Khomeini's reign, that law flipped and women were required to be covered and be very modest. And the idea is that the women are beneath men and that their bodies are considered to be only for the household, for their husbands. And also the idea is that if there's any ounce of skin showing, it makes the woman look less modest and it sexualizes them. And men felt that women needed to be fully covered to prevent that sort of thought. So we move on now to gender mixing versus gender segregation. So prior to, like in here, we can have all genders in the same space together. After the revolution, a strict law was enforced that segregation of genders in public spaces became a mandate. So in relating to music, we'll talk about in a little bit, a lot of different spaces, saying like prayer spaces, they needed to be men in one room, women in another room. And it even went into performances. So sometimes we'll talk more in a little bit about how there was female-only performances because women were not allowed to perform or sing for men. So definitely a lot of segregation and separation between men and women. So now kind of branching into a little bit more about cultural impact with the arts. So And Pahlavi was really, like I said before, really was a huge ally of the United States, really supported and encouraged the westernization of Iran. So he really loved the idea of embracing Iran's roots and culture and melding it and blending it with other countries, which is a wonderful, beautiful sort of thing. But unfortunately, in the revolution, Khomeini viewed the Western cultures, like I said, as a threat. And he believed that pretty much all other countries' cultures were lesser than Iran's. And he believed that we needed to have a sort of nationalistic approach to Iran where everything was just only about them in there. So another very important one is the emphasis on education. So when it comes to pre-revolution, our education was very modern and secular, very similar to how you would experience a public school here in the United States. And then after the revolution, Khomeini made a law to where all text must be completely revamped, and anything that is secular and not in Islamic law or Islamic religion must be cut out, and all text must be replaced with text from a religious-based standpoint. So this caused a lot of issues with religion, which we'll talk a little bit more about the cultural impact right after the revolution. And the last kind of big bullet point to put everything into perspective, especially shifting to women's rights, is so there was a huge family law. So in 1967, a family law was put in place that Pahlavi created to basically give women more rights. So prior to this family law, women were not so much treated as equal. So basically, with this law, women were allowed to, refuse polygamy in relationships. Women were the age was increased for marriage, which was quite low before, and a lot of just legal things towards women had improved dramatically because of this family law. So very clearly supporting of these women's rights and putting a law in place to make them feel comfortable and safe. And then, unfortunately, with Khomeini's revolution, he overturned the family law and basically kind of undid everything Pahlavi tried to attempt to do to help women. And I can read through a list of quite a few things that women have to go through. And a lot of these things still are in place to this day. So marriage in many countries, and especially in Iran, Muslim men are allowed to marry non-Muslim women, but women are not allowed to marry non-Muslim men. So that's one of the big things. So with divorce, men have a much easier time with divorce. It's very easy for them to just go to the courthouse, if you will, and just sign it. Versus it wasn't illegal for women, but it was very, very difficult, and it had to be very extreme circumstances. And along with that, child custody. So regardless of outcomes of most things, the man, husband, father always had custody of the child, regardless, unless I said it's an extreme situation, but 99% of the time, the man always had control. And polygamy was also reversed, and it became legal for men to have multiple wives. And then finally, guardianship. So men basically had guardianship over their women and their wives and their children. So essentially, not only did the husbands have custody of their children, they basically had a say-all for what their women or their wives did. Very much treated like second-class citizens. I think a very good example of that is if a woman were to travel outside of Iran, they would need their husband's permission to leave the country. I think that's a really good example. So clearly a huge impact of the revolution. So kind of highlighting, there's a lot of other things that unfortunately happened during this time, but hopefully this gives you a little bit of a snapshot of the overview of the intensity of what happened. So right after the revolution, I kind of like to think about it, there was a little bit like 3 time periods post-revolution where different landmarks kind of happened. So the first one in 1980 was the Cultural Revolution, so right after the revolution. So Now we're diving more into art specific and more about music. So going back to talking about education, with education being shifted to being all about religion and religious text, and right in 1980, the university teachers who were more liberal and more Marxist style in teaching, they were all let go and replaced by teachers who focused on religion studies. And because of this cultural revolution that happened in 1980, universities actually shut down for 2 years completely because they wanted to fully revamp all of the education to have it centered only around Islamic culture. And so then kind of diving even further into music related, because of this, music departments were actually closed for almost a decade. Music departments in schools were closed for it was around 8 years. So music was very much shunned at this point and just kind of put down. And the reason for this is Khomeini, he would say to the public that music was the opium of the youth. He considered music to be quite toxic and could cause people to become corrupt. So through this, he then actually banned the trading of instruments and he also banned playing of instruments of all kind. So people were not allowed to play instruments in public, which is insane to think about, right? Then we move on to 1988. So the Cultural Revolution caused a lot of these, basically music to shut down, if you will. In 1988, that was the end of the Iran-Iraq War and the death of Khomeini. And this was a pivotal time post-revolution. After the death of Khomeini, leadership became a bit more moderate and not so 100% related into the Islamic religion. And so some things begin to lightly lean up. It's kind of they had a little bit of hope kind of going forward. So 2 years prior to Khomeini's death, he actually lifted the ban of playing instruments, but there was very strict rules regarding that. Instruments could only be Iranian descent instruments, and they can only be used for religious sake. So with him passing away and the people and citizens are allowed to play instruments, it then allowed more instruments to flourish after his death under new ruling, because it wasn't against the law. So then people kind of started to, sneak in more different types of styles of music. With that, a more moderate president came into power, like I said. And it's also important to note, with this resurgence of instrumentation and instruments in music, classical music actually became more prominent again. It's almost kind of, the country was starving for art, and then all of a sudden it was allowed a little bit again, so then they just sucked it back in. So the music started to become a thing, but unfortunately it was still heavily moderated. A lot of the times the music needed to be revolutionary based or very religious based, but it still was a step in the right direction to having more music. And then going into more specifics for women in broadcast and TV. So women were not allowed to sing in public, and they still are not allowed to sing solo in public. So if a woman were to be on stage and sing by herself, there's potential that she can get executed or very heavily reprimanded. But with instruments, women as smart as we are, we found a loophole during this 1988 time period. There was no ban on women playing instruments. So women really kind of embraced that and ran with it, if you will. So during this time, like I said, women were not allowed to be seen singing alone. So on broadcast and on TV, you would often see the singers, which was always a male, singing on broadcast, and you would never see the instrumentalist. Because even though instruments were allowed at this point, they were still not seen as worthy enough to be on the screen on broadcast on TV. So you would always see the singer, a man, singing on there, but then off screen they would be playing their instruments, but they would not be credited, and their names would not be in the credits. You would never see their faces. You would have no idea who was playing the instruments. You would only know about the man singing on the screen. And even if the man was not singing on the screen, his name would be in the credits, but not anyone else playing instruments. So, that's still very suppressive, but it's still a step in the right direction in this time period because women are now being allowed to play music, which is, it's still suppressed, but we're inching forward to progress. So even though we were inching forward to great progress, there was still a huge absence of female presence during this time period. But it was definitely, like I said, in the right direction. And then we go on to 2005. So from 1988 to 2005 is when we started to kind of have a bit of hope, more women playing instruments, women coming together, trying to figure out how they can make it work around the laws. And then unfortunately, in 2005, the very controversial presidential election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, he basically wanted to criticize any cultural change that had happened over the past decade, basically since 1988. So pretty much he prohibited a lot of the activities that we were allowed to do, that women were allowed to do during that time. And his whole concept was going back to cultural roots. So basically going back to revolution time period. So he was very controlling, and it's very interesting to note that there was no laws banning anything anymore with music, really, any new laws set in place. It was just everyone was very reprimanded or would get in very serious trouble. It was kind of everything had loopholes through it, if you will. So if someone wanted to have a musical activity, whether woman or man, but mostly women, there would become infinite more loopholes for them to get to do the activity, which then made it very difficult. And of course, with women not making as much income as men, or if they are being controlled by their husbands, they don't have control over the money, they might not have the resources to get through those loopholes. So then it kind of pushed back a bit. So this is kind of the post-revolution, sort of the three sort of major time periods of impact. And I will say to this day, a lot of the things from 2005 still stand in place. Some things everything ebbs and flows in this country. I think a big important factor is that Iranian civilization, they had a taste of what it was like to have freedom prior to the revolution. And so now there's always this controversial fight and protest between the two, in many countries, but which I think is this day is allowing more women to do more arts and music related activities in Iran because of that. So let's see, do I have anything else before going on? So now specifically the impact of the revolution for women in music. So kind of going along this idea of Persian women and how they made it work with instruments. So this is kind of going into that post-Iran-Iraq war, going into even past 2005 presidency, where women were trying to get through those loopholes, like I had mentioned. So there's two groups right here. The group on the left, you'll see, is it your left? Yes. There is a group named Dingo, and they called this space the Dingo Studio. And the way you'll see it is that the women are still very covered. And the way that they got around being hidden from screens or cameras was that they believed if they dressed in very traditional Persian attire, it would convince men that they were worthy of being seen on screen. So still being very covered, but also really, styled in the Persian culture and tradition. And you'll notice in this group, they are a band, but there's no singer. So a lot of times women were very strategic about this because there was no singing allowed for a solo woman. And we think of a band, there's always one singer. So there was a lot of these instrumental groups of women with no singing. because it was that loophole again of getting around getting to perform as a group. Um, and then on the flip side, they would also, be like, have a group like this, but then they might have a male friend, colleague who was supportive of their rights, be the singer. Um, and then going down even further, we could break down the laws into even more nitty-gritty details, but I'll save that. Women were not allowed to sing solo, but women could sing if they were next to a man, with a man, or if there was two women with a man, that sort of thing. But it really negated the idea of just a single female speaker or singer. So, and then another example of, more modern sort of, I guess, I don't want to say protest, but trying to modernize things is in the picture you see on the right, Majid Darashkian on the left is a famous tar player. He was very known for playing the tar, which is the instrument you see, basically an Iranian guitar, if you will. He released music with a solo singer in 2015, so 10 years ago. I say that's not long ago, but gosh, 2015 is longer than I thought. So you see Madhi Mohammed Khani, she is singing with him in this performance. And, it's such an impactful moment in time in 2015 because we saw them perform and we heard this woman singing by herself with them. But then later on, he was set on trial for having a woman sing solo on stage. So that was 10 years ago. Thankfully, he was not found guilty and they let him go. But that just shows one example of even more modern day that a woman by herself singing is not allowed. Let's see, what are my bullet points? So, yes, so women banned from singing solo in public, like I had mentioned. And we had talked a lot about this. Female instrumentalist restricted, but not allowed really to be seen in person. One example of another time that was also 2015, that was kind of crazy that my two examples were in the same year. So in classical music, the Tehran Symphony Orchestra, so Tehran, the capital of Iran, they were much more forward-thinking, and in 2015, they had mixed gender in the orchestra, female and male performing. The women did have to be covered. In 2015, they were going to be performing for a huge sports event, some world wrestling Olympic style event. It was going to be all over the news, all over the country. Leaders of Iran actually stopped the performance at the very beginning because they saw women were in the orchestra. And because of that, the leader of the Tehran Symphony said, no, we're not going to play then. So there is hope with all of this. So, there are a few examples of still women being suppressed, but there are men in the country who are also, trying to support and improve their conditions as well. I think it's important to also mention, because I'm talking so heavily about the negatives of the men, but there were a good few handfuls of them, my father included. So I had mentioned briefly, so another way for women to get to perform is that they created female-only concerts. So like how I had mentioned, women were only allowed to, they were not allowed to sing by themselves. So if they wanted to have like a singer-songwriter type concert we're used to, they would only be allowed to do that in front of women the whole time. And then for a long time, they were not allowed to even be mixed-gendered singing until more recently in the past 30 years or so. But even then, it's depending on the area of where you are in the country. And then with this, of course, limited opportunities. Like I had mentioned briefly a minute ago, with women having lower income if they were working, or their husband being in control of basically their lives and finances, it gave them limited opportunities to access a lot that is involved in music, like having good instruments, finding spaces, even just having free time if they're not taking care of their children. Um, so yes, so quite a few different things that happened with women throughout. But of course, as women, we persevere and always trying to find a way around things. Um, so before I even mention this, I forgot to mention a lot of the artwork you see on here is through this movement of that what we call the women life freedom movement. And a lot of artists drew a lot of art for this slogan. And there was the unfortunate killing of Mahsa Amini in 2022, where she was killed for not wearing her hijab. And a lot of this artwork came from the protest of this time, and I think they're very powerful. So I forgot to mention that at the beginning. So side note. Okay, so going back to the Persian women's musical journey and what did they do? So simplest one is they pursued career and education abroad. And I say simple, but it really could be quite complex for them if they were already married and their husband did not want them to leave. Because if their husband did not want them to leave, then they were not permitted to go. And then say they were still younger, or even they could have been over 18, it didn't matter. If they were not married, their fathers would be the one to allow them or not allow them to study abroad. So another thing, if women artists stayed in Iran, it really grew a huge underground music scene that featured female artists. So basically, this goes along with my next point, a lot of private concerts in homes and secret venues. So this goes, a lot of times this was seen in Tehran, in the bigger city hubs. Concerts that were done under the radar, no one talked about them, no one knew, it was just kind of word of mouth, like, hey, this is happening. I kind of relate it to if there was a house party here, or a house show and a small band is kind of playing. It was very small in that nature, but also very risky and dangerous. Because as more of these underground concerts or secret concerts were coming about, it was easy for the law and others to hear about this and try to basically bust the party, if you will. So these women were trying to do anything they could to get to perform for each other and learn about music, even if it meant getting in trouble or even getting killed. So and along with that, they created makeshift underground recording studios. So I kind of like to think, we women, we like to work together. That it goes along with, I think, my next point too. Oh, not yet, but we'll get to it. Secretive music education for women. Both of this in the studio kind of relate. Basically, women who are really empowered to learn music, they all just learn from each other. Basically, a hidden network, if you will. If you really want to learn piano, this person go here. And then, if you want to record your singing, go here. It was very hush-hush under the table, if you will, which was very unfortunate. And then here where I had my PowerPoint out of order, another big one that we see quite common in a lot of other countries and throughout history is the use of synonyms to protect their identities. So throughout all of history, women are known for using male-centered, gender-neutral names, especially in music as composers. So if a female composer wrote something and they wanted it to get it out to the public, if they saw a female name, like my name, Roya, someone might look at it and just tear it to shreds and throw it away. But if they see a male name, like Muhammad, Vafa, or any sort of male name, they would give it a chance. And going into more modern day and age, with the evolution of technology, it made music sharing infinitely easier. Thankfully, technology, there's lots of goods and bad things, but with this, even though, there's a lot of, anonymity in regards to being online, women were still too afraid to use their names if they were living in Iran and posting online. So then they would still use more male-centered names to have their music published. And prior to online social media and all that great stuff we have today, through snail mail, right? through going through the mail. So that's why they had to have everything feel as gender neutral, more male focused as possible to get it out there, because going through the post office, they would just tear things apart. So yes, so that's just a few of the ways that women tried to branch out into the musical world. Basically, they just tried to anything in their power to keep music a part of their life. So going into more specifics and how women used music and what they did with their music for activism. So in this context, it's talking a bit more about women who wrote music and composed music. So, women, if they did write songs, say if they were protest type songs, the songs contained lyrics that were veiled with critiques of society and government. So a lot of times they would just write music that had very subtle hints at what they're really meaning, or saying using poetry to mean a different sort of thing. And then also some women just performs in public as an act of defiance, which that is very risky, right? Of course. So some women were just not afraid to go out and perform in public. And then a lot of times those women were severely punished. So women reinterpreted traditional Persian music forms to express contemporary feminist ideas. So kind of like how I had mentioned with wearing more Persian garbs and outfits, they tried to have their music that they wrote be more in the Persian traditional style, because they had this idea that if my music is still in this Persian form and it's still very much nationalistic of Iran, that it'll be more accepted by all genders, which is quite clever. And then finally, during large protests for women's rights, this is similar to a lot of other countries with protests, they will often use old folk songs, but give new lyrics to the reflecting current struggles happening. So they'll use a lot of classic Persian traditions and just reword things in those veiled sort of masked writings. And then finally, the biggest one is female Iranian artists in diaspora use their platforms to raise awareness about women's rights in Iran. So this is kind of where I segue into talking a bit more about my kind of specific research and what I have been doing over the past couple of years. So I've been briefly just now talking a lot about how composers, women who wrote music, how they get their music out into the world. That was, my dissertation was an anti-bibliography of works by Iranian women for flute and small ensembles. And so I went down this huge rabbit hole of emailing everyone in the world who is a Persian Iranian woman and asked if they had flute music. And the reason why I bring this up is because it relates to this association that I'm going to be talking about that really was kind of the group that pioneered the start of all of my research. So as an Iranian American, my father being from Iran, my mother being here from America, I felt when I was trying to figure out research and what to do, what hit close to home, and always hearing stories from my father about how my grandmother struggled and it was difficult. It really just wanted me to, find like-minded people. And I came across the Iranian Female Composers Association. It was almost too good to be true. So this group was established in 2017. The three women who founded this group, Nilufar Nurbakhsh, Ida Shirazi, and Anita Abbasi, these three wonderful women founded this group. And the whole idea of this group for composers was their mission was to support Iranian female composers throughout their careers, inspire global commissions and collaborations, help overcome cultural and educational roadblocks, mentor young female composers in Iran. And while their group is very centered around composers and writing music, myself, I'm not a composer. Oh goodness, I might have degrees in music, but I'll play it, but I don't know if I can write it. Me working with them as a collaborator, it's almost more of a network of not just people who write music, but it's for performers like me who want to play pieces by these women. So this group is a good example of trying to create a chain of network of like-minded women who want to pursue music and are from Iran and have come from a suppressed background. So a lot of these women, there's The last time I checked, there was 40 composers in the group, which is a wonderful number. It's been a while since I checked, so I'm sure maybe it's grown. Um, and it's always growing, and they're always so eager to have their music performed, which I absolutely love. But it's a great group, and there's a lot of Iranian women out there. And this is just talking about composers. There's a plethora of performers out there too, and educators. Um, so yes, this Iranian Female Composer Association is really what spearheaded all of this, and it's a wonderful example of Iranian women working together to help themselves, help women who are currently in Iran and trying to help them get out of Iran, or if they are staying in Iran, how to help them try to navigate what is going on there. So it's a big network of connecting all across the world, which is a very beautiful thing. Okay, I have time. So I'd like to end a lot of all of this is I'm going to talk. I have a few quotes from a couple of the composers I've been working with, and I'd like to just read them verbatim because I think it's quite powerful to hear their stories. They're very short, and then I'll play a really short piece for you all. So Nilüfer Nurbakhsh, she was one of the founders of the Iranian Female Composers Association. So let me read. This is just a snippet on the screen, but I'll read the whole thing for you. So these are words from Nilüfer Nurbakhsh. As a woman growing up in Iran, discriminations facing me were not subtle at all. The society and government laws actively veiled women's presence through multiple tools, such as hijabs and banning solo female singers from pursuing professional careers. It never once occurred to me that I could become a composer, and I was continuously discouraged from pursuing it by close family members and as well as dear teachers. I was told that I would be a better musician as a pianist and that composing was reserved only for geniuses. It took many years for me to overcome this systematic oppression that I had internalized, but after finishing my bachelor's degree in the United States, I understood that this experience was not only unique to me. As a strong advocate for music education and equal opportunities, I founded the Iranian Female Composers Association to elevate my community by making sure their voices are heard. Throughout this process, I have not only brought a new community into the contemporary classical music world, but I've also been able to show the Iranian community that they can now reimagine and share their stories through new reform performances. I believe that we must understand the mission of diversity not only as representation, but also as a step towards creating a wider space that allows different stories, perspectives, and artistic visions in our music world to breathe. Very beautiful. So then I have just a few more. So these wonderful composers, I've performed works by all of these women. They're fantastic at what they do. So I'm actually going to go in reverse. So Nigan Zomadori, wonderful composer. I'm going to read her little story. So not little, quite big story, if you will. So my name is Nigan Zomadori, and I'm an Iranian woman who has fiercely battled familiar and societal constraints since childhood to pursue my dream of becoming a composer. Through this lecture and my talk just now, I'm aiming to reflect critically on the power of art, which has marginalized composers such as myself. As a woman composer in the Middle East, having experienced war, revolution, and migration, I seek to unravel how personal and cultural experiences intertwine to shape my musical works. I want to explore how cultural and political constraints created obstacles that led to discovery of new musical language and intercultural experimentation as a form of resistance. Through my 50 years, I have weathered severe political and social storms, feeling guilt and helplessness over my homeland's turmoil and the lack of peace for my family and friends. Unconsciously, I have channeled these waves of suffering into my music. The violence and sadness embedded in my notes have strangely enough enriched my compositions despite of the restrictions. Without delving into political and social analysis too deeply, I'll examine and I talk a lot about my periods of isolation and house arrest brought on by wars and the revolution in my country. During these dark times, external hardships compelled me to create an inner light, finding solstice in my music creations to combat the loneliness of the war and the revolution. The arrival of the piano in my home coincided with the political upheaval in Iran, which severely restricted music education. At 6 years old, I began to learn music secretly. My private teacher visiting our home in secret without anyone knowing because of the prohibition on music and learning. My family profoundly influenced my musical journey during that time. As an Iranian woman, I constantly navigate complex social and economic conditions which inevitably shape the creation, music, and production of my works. As an independent artist, I have composed avant-garde music without orders or financial or spiritual support, always worrying about my salary, concert hall rentals, audience presence, and publishing contracts. The patriarchal nature of the Iranian society often sidelines female composers. In a notable composition project of mine, I was mysteriously removed from the program, which really highlighted the basis of gender discrimination in my career. And then the last quote I'll read is from Gulfem Kalani. It's much shorter. So, as a woman composer, there are times when attention is focused more on gender rather than musical ability. Despite being based in Tehran and staying and living in Iran, I've been fortunate to not have my music be as suppressed as much as I feel it could be, thanks to the use of global exchange and technology. The magic of music allows my compositions to travel easily across borders, often premiering in very distant locations. Due to travel restrictions in Iran, many of my premieres of music are experienced remotely, which is very fascinating and surreal. For instance, one of my pieces titled Lost Wind for flute and gong is a piece that I have never heard live perform, only heard through recording. And then the last composer is, I don't have a quote from her per se, but I'm gonna end my talk by playing a short piece by her. So Afarin Mazari, she is a wonderful composer, and she wrote and composed this piece titled Lament. It's very, very slow and represents her feelings of turmoil having to leave Iran in order to pursue education. So, as a lot of us know, leaving our family to go do something can be quite difficult. And especially in Middle Eastern Iranian culture, family is very close. Like a lot of times when you're young, you live with your family until well into 20s, 30s, your parents, you take care of them a lot. Someone having to leave for their bachelor's degree or, even master's, it can be very heart-wrenching because of that, and also because they don't know if they'll be able to get back into the country too, because of bans and restrictions. So I'm going to be playing this piece by Afran Tarani, and she, like I said, it's titled Lament, and this is just her feelings and emotions with having to leave her country. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you.